yesterday. Did anyone wear sandals today? Hope rolling the die on the. We wouldn't have another alarm. All right, so we got to the bus. Oh, what was the philosophy that wanted to blow up the old order, replace it with perfect socialism, and some believed in revolutionary terror? Anarchists. And what name would they call like labor unions and groups like that to discredit them, to get them close to anarchists? What kind of anarchists? Yeah, bomb throwing anarchists. The Panic of 1873. So, what did the B&O Railroad do, even though they were still making money? And what would that trigger? What did the militia do in Pennsylvania when they sent the militia to stop the strike? And what did they call them when it became nationwide and fighting in the streets and cities were taken over? Yeah, the Great Upheaval. What kind of troops did President Hayes send to divide the workers? Black soldiers fresh from Reconstruction duty to put down striking white workers. And then we got to the boom bust. We have, don't look at me, look down at your paper, don't look at your notes. What's this curve called? Deflationary. And this is the big thing, this kind of overproduction, they produce more, and then the cutbacks and drop in demand. And then we got to, what happens to optimism? What happens to people's feelings once the bust hits? Yeah, we're doomed. It's all over. And that lingers, just like the optimism lingers. That's one of the reasons why the bubble will be one of the last things to burst. People are still feeling optimistic. Even when prices start dropping, they think, okay, it'll go back up. I'm going to buy when it's cheap, and we're all going to get rich. They keep on thinking that it's always like that. It's this weird euphoria and weird sense of doom. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. They have a much different attitude towards it. So older people's like, oh, I got to save. You know, you never know what tomorrow will be. And so you can see, well, why do you have to save? But then again, that also leads to a point why so many people get hooked up with the euphoria because they don't remember the bad times. They don't remember. That's part of the reason in 2004, 2005, people were going nuts in the bubble. They just forgot. And people forget. Not this time. Yeah, that's a really good point about that. So let's go ahead and move our way back up. So what gets the country out of a bust? Something has to happen. Here's the thing. No one's buying anything. And just imagine a situation where we do have a bust, where we have massive unemployment. So let's say we're all in a neighborhood. And all of you guys lost your job. You lose your home. I mean, it's really tough. The rest of you have kept your jobs. How are you feeling now? Feeling good? Let's go out and buy that boat. What do you think? Because what might happen to you tomorrow? You don't know what tomorrow will be. If you have people, your neighbors and friends are on the point of desperation, even if you kept your job, you might still keep that money in your pocket. So demand is curtailed even with people who have money. Because you never know what tomorrow will be. Oh, would you put your money in the bank? You had all those bank closers? Oh, that's the jar in the backyard. And so, no one's buying. If you have a business, are you going to expand? Hey, prices are low. No, because no one's buying. You start a new business. Banks aren't loaning money. It is a catastrophe. Something has got to happen. And it's got to be a little bit outside of the normal realm. Because you get this weird equilibrium where no one is buying. What gets the country out of this is something triggers demand, where people start buying stuff. Either somebody buys stuff on the outside in, or people have money out of some way. Now, there's a couple ways this happens. It could be a technological change that happened in the early 1920s. There was a crash after World War I, but the new technological changes of new manufacturing techniques and things like the radio just exploded on the scene. Another one is maybe new international trade. That happened in the late 1890s. International trade exploded. But the biggest one is government action. Government does not have the same restraints as people do. Oh, sure, government can have debt, but they collect taxes. They have an army. They have a totally different point of view than regular people who do not have. do not have those things, especially if it's like the United States today. The United States loans or borrows money in a currency that the United States creates. It gives you a lot of power. Well, the government action after 1873, that's when they gave money for the Northern Pacific Railroad, the Santa Fe, and the Southern Pacific. You build railroads, you need steel, coal, mining, etc. That would stimulate business. Also, other railroad production here too. So government action. During the Great Depression, a big part of Franklin Roosevelt's and the Democrats' New Deal was providing massive government jobs to build dams and roads and whatever, which provided jobs and therefore money for people. During COVID, it started with under President Trump, even though most of his own party opposed this. President Trump would sign one bill that gave people a check, money, cash, to stimulate demand during COVID when you have a pandemic and everything was shutting down. And then under President Biden, it was even a bigger check, and $600 per month per child for families. This money stimulated demand. And other things too. And so that's how demand was created. And the US did more of that than other countries. Part of the reason why the United States came out of the COVID depression faster than anybody else. But Germany was still kind of in it, which is sort of unusual. Germany's economy was so strong before that. So with demand going up, what happens to the supply of goods, production? All of a sudden, people have a little bit more money. What did they do? If you didn't have money, and all of a sudden you have money, what's the first thing you're going to do with that money? Yeah, buy all the stuff you couldn't buy before. Food, clothing. And so that's going to stimulate the supply of goods, aka production. Demand will go up, production will go up. And then you need workers. So workers will go up. Unemployment begins to drop. They need workers. All of a sudden, more people with jobs, more people with money, and here's the engine to get out of a bust. That stimulates demand or supply. So the opposite of this one, where you have cutbacks and layoff, stimulate the bust. Here, where workers demand, that stimulates going back out of the boom. And then that's when you start seeing things of the economy getting better. And they're pretty basic. Prices begin to go up. Banks begin to feel better about credit, about loaning money. And the last thing, wages begin to go up. Wages begin to go up. When you have that cycle, that is when you get back to a boom. And once again, same kind of deal. It's hard to tell here. It's hard to tell here. It's hard to tell if the boom is going too fast. I mean, these are all difficult things. And that's why prices going up. This is called the inflationary curve. The inflationary curve. And that's the boom bust cycle. Who does well in a bust? Yeah, big. Who's ever the biggest are, they do well. So wealthy people, biggest companies, if they survive here and here, if they got through that, if they're still big, if they still have wealth, when the bust hits, they can buy all their competitors. If there's deflation, just the money sitting there will gain in value. And that means that when you get to the boom, there are fewer competitors in each market. Because there's always consolidation. And then the next bust, there'll be even more consolidation and even more. So the boom bust always, in the long run, helps the big. Now, let's be clear. Somebody could be exceedingly wealthy and they thought, we're all going to get rich, and they gambled in real estate or the stock market and lose everything. But some could be, well, there's a guy named Joe Kennedy who got started in movie producing and bootlegging, and he pulled out of the stock market just before it crashed in 1929, when the prices were still high, and so had a massive fortune that would survive his family to this day. And he wanted his sons to go into politics. One son was killed in World War II, so the second oldest son would become John Kennedy. when he didn't rename John Kennedy would become president. So that's just an example. He changed his name. He would become. Okay. Who came up with this idea? This is economic. This is a real thing. Who came up with this? Remember, this is all brand new. The second half of the 19th century, capitalism was brand new. All this was new. Our economic system now, which seems so old and like it's been around forever, is really new. Just like the cult of domesticity that came out of it, it's just really new. I told you his name before. He might have wrote a book with Frederick Engels. Karl Marx. It's Marx. Now, Marx came up with this not to say, hey, how do we alleviate the problems of a boom and bust to avoid this and have a steady economy? No, Karl Marx came up with this by saying, see, capitalism is inherently flawed and must be destroyed and replaced with socialism. So Marx was using this as a reason to get rid of it. And his justification was, every time there's a bust, wealth focuses more and more to the top and workers are exploited even more. That's what he said. Now, regardless of your view on that point of view Marx had, it's still a brilliant economics. I mean, this was him. You're taking other people's writings and it's pretty brilliant. Well, let's get to our views on capitalism and the market. Economic systems, they're going to come out all across the world and the United States. And it's going to come basically from these two ideas. What is more important? The suppliers of goods, that means the big companies, and therefore government should help them, and that's the best way to avoid the bust or the slow down the boom before it gets overheated. Or is demand, workers, job security, higher wages, better living standards for average workers? Is that a better way to promote economy? So I've mentioned conservative economics before. Is conservative economics more pro-supply side or more demand side? So get this down wherever you want. That's conservative economics. In fact, by the 1970s, they would start calling conservative economics supply side economics. So it's basically, you think about the suppliers. That's putting money in the hands of the wealthy because they know how to produce, and that will lead to general prosperity. That is why the number one policy position of conservative economics is to give tax breaks for the wealthy and then replace that with tax increases for other people. With the idea the wealthy need the money, then they will produce prosperity. That's what happened in Montana under conservative governor Jim Folke and conservative legislature. Like, for example, next year I will have, and probably most of your parents will have a pretty substantial tax increase, but wealthy people have a big tax decrease. Why? So they invest. Liberal economics, the exact opposite. Help working people. I'm already kind of gearing up for the tax increases in 2025. Actually, the tax increases for this year will be for the tax return next year. They did that on purpose, so it's happening next year. So, liberal. That's liberal economics. Now, sometimes you see it called demand side economics, and it really hasn't established in this era going into until the end of the 19th century. Because liberal economics always has this thing where, okay, we want capitalism to work better for all people, but that means they want some socialist prescriptions, perhaps, and therefore it's going to be a tug way, okay, why don't you just become full socialist? Well, no, they're not. They want capitalism to function. And then in the 1930s, there'll be a British economist by the name of John Maynard Keynes. And his economic ideas will be so important to demand side economics that liberal economics to this day is called Keynesian. We will get to it. I will draw you another beautiful chart of conservative economics and liberal economics. We'll come to it, but we're not quite there yet. It's forming right here. So what's more important? The workers, so better wages, better conditions, or the few, because it's going to be a smaller number. Those who supply the goods produce it, the more wealthy. Pretty good diagram, huh? You know what I'm thinking? I'm looking at this and I agree with you. This would be a fun thing to recreate on a test. Who agrees? Yeah, it's unanimous. I love democracy. So, yeah, I will tell you exactly what you have to do, but you'll have to recreate part of this for the test. Not every element. I know there's a lot of things on this. But you guess the big things, you know, the overproduction, cutbacks, demand, and supply. You know, those are the big things that have to happen. All right, so let us get into, this is the boom bust cycle. We started yesterday, finished it today, and did the panic of 1873, so that's the panic. And remember, I finished yesterday with workers showed they had more power than ever before. So let's get to unions. Not close. Trying to see. Yep. Used to be a string, and I could grab the string. Then I broke the string. So let's get to unionism. We've talked about the union before, but now we got to get to it again. And this is a worldwide phenomenon, but obviously we're talking about the United States. And the big thing about unions were one worker has no power. Collective bargaining. We've mentioned this before. All the workers come together for a contract. One worker doesn't have power. And that's why this picture, this is actually from an industrial union called the International Workers of the World. They were big in Butte. But all the workers together in solidarity can make a bigger fist. And that's a lot of symbols of solidarity coming together as a fist, which is still used to this day. And so economies of scale. Group have more power. And there are two different types of unions. Basic, generic types of unions. A craft or a trade union in the United States are so-called skilled workers. Okay, I put them in quotes because skilled means they have some kind of certificate, some kind of training. So they could be an engineer on a train, a brakeman, a cooper, a puddler who makes steel. You know, some kind of skill. And so they could be a journeyman, a skilled craftsman. So they are something that their skill is in relative demand. And then all the other workers who have no, obviously they have skills, but they don't have the certificate per se. And that's called an industrial. That's all workers. When I first started teaching the Helena Education Association, that's the union I'm in, it was just purely a craft union. Teachers are, we have a profession, you know, we're professionals, we have a certificate, you know, all this stuff, whatever. We are very professional. No, we are professional, we have this class. Well, after about 10 years, I was maybe a little bit less than 10 years, they opened, or the union then expanded to include all employees in the school. So we went from a craft union to an industrial union. Even though technically they're different contracts for each, we're all one big union together. And that was actually kind of controversial. A lot of people are in a craft union, you know, they don't have much, but they have that kind of skill above anybody else. So that actually was a fight here. And you guess by my tone, well, I probably stood on that. And the big argument this is going to be is working conditions. Working conditions. Yeah, I got into arguments about this. We should open it up there. Be stronger. It was a real argument. But does democracy go to the workplace? Do you have power to decide how you'll make a living? The working conditions, how dangerous it is, whether or not you will have a break and actually have time outside of work to survive, and a retirement with dignity, go on and on and on. Or you can imagine the point of view of the capitalists. They took the risk. They want to control their factory. I mean, that is a conflict that goes on to this day. And so that's what unionism is about. The argument about unions, sure, companies don't like to pay more, and unions always get more wages, higher wages. But it's also control. That's a big issue. So another big issue that was growing at this time was child labor. Of course, there's always been child labor. We talk about farms, and remember cottage industry, that putting out system. There has been child labor. But now it's working for somebody else. It is collecting a wage. So you're throwing 10-year-olds into the wage system. So here is an industrial farm, cotton farm, bobbin boys, bobbin girls, incredibly dangerous in the textiles. Breaker boys, that is someone who's working in a hard rock mine, that's in Butte. 13 or 14-year-old in Butte. And child labor was becoming a big issue. 20 to 25% of children under the age of 15 were full-time employees. And a lot of them would work all day, then go to school at night. And now the child laborers are working all night, going to school during the day. I'm laughing in a very dark way. Ironically, it makes me sad. But what does child labor do to wages? Dramatically. Now, the first one is obvious. They're kids. You can force them to have smaller wages because you can intimidate little kids. And what's a 10-year-old going to do? And they would. You complain? Yeah. And it was that bad. It was horrible. That's the other thing. This is even more important. How does child labor cut wages for all workers? What decides wages? Supply and demand. All of a sudden you have this whole pool of 10 to 15-year-olds who are now full-time workers. What does that mean? What's that? No supply. So now adults are competing with children for wages. Drives wages down. Just like prison labor drives wages down. In fact, there was just an article in AP. Remember the 13th Amendment? I literally just read it today about how prison labor is going up, especially on farms and food manufacturing, to force wages down. So, back to this. It drives wages down. Yeah, this is right now. I mean, these things, you think, oh, that happened back in the 1870s. No, it's right now. Like a kid in a 13-year-old boy who was working full-time at a chicken processing center in Arkansas got caught in the deboner and was mangled. That just happened a couple days ago. Arkansas just changed their laws to allow kids 12 to 16 to work full-time. That's where they want the kids to work today. These states are doing Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma, Ohio. Yeah. And certain things like farm, yeah. That's in our constitutions. It's harder to change. Our governor we change. That's kind of his policy. But he can't, it's our constitution. It says in Arkansas don't have it. And but it's the food problem. They want to go in the kids in the slaughterhouses, food packing. Yeah, that's what kids are. That's what they're really doing. But back to this. The other problem with this is think about labor unions. Here, they work very difficult, hard, backbreaking jobs. What do they want for their kids? What kind of hope for this 11-year-old boy who's breaking coal in an incredibly dangerous job, or using their feet to stomp pieces of coal into smaller pieces? What's their best hope for a future? Maybe go to school when they're after 8-hour day or 12-hour day, go to school. Maybe have a slightly better job in the coal mine. Hard to really plan for the future or think about having a better life if they have no hope for the future. And part of this is they're worried about their kids not having hope. Unions wanted to end child labor, not just to raise wages, but it's because they're kids. And remember the call to domesticity when we talked about how families and why people have kids was changing? And it was more and more. I want my child to have a better life and not the same dead end it seemed like that I had. So let's get to the two different big labor unions. The first one was the Knights of Labor. 1869. There's a couple other efforts of big national unions. Uriah Stevens started it, but Terrence Powderly was the man who's probably most responsible for ushering it through the panic where it nearly died. Also, I just wanted to show his really cool mustache. You got to admit, that's pretty awesome. And his idea of the union was different than previous ones. They thought they could be more than just a labor union for better working conditions. This whole knowledge is power. They want to educate people, to have people as a force for a better society. They wanted one big union. And that same cry would go to the IWW going into the 20th century, which we will get to. Big and Butte. So this is all workers, and they invited everybody in, and unlike almost every other union outside of the textile mills, they actively recruited women and people who were descendants of slaves or Chinese or Japanese immigrants, all workers. And they were very much opposed to the wage system, which is the big element of capitalism. They wanted something more like a cooperative system. It's not really clear how it would work, but the workers would have a greater voice in production and worker safety and wages. This might sound like something, where the workers might have a little more control over the capital or the means of production. And their main elements: 8-hour working day, better working, safer working conditions. What does an 8-hour working day do to wages? Why? Think about with electricity. So you can run a factory now 24 hours a day, 2 shifts of 12, 24 hours a day. But if it's an 8-hour working day, how many shifts do you need? That's a third more workers, a third more demand for laborers, and therefore higher wages. And don't forget, now that you're working for somebody else, it's radically different. This idea of 8 hours for yourself, away from having to make a living working for somebody else, was an important element, as you will find out or might already know. They also believed in women's rights, civil rights. It really fit in with this whole goal of what they had. Also, end child labor. That's pretty obvious. That's why I mentioned it before. And government regulation, antitrust. Trust is synonymous with what? You remember? What is trust? Say it again. Yeah, monopoly. So anti-monopoly, antitrust. I got a call because they're going to call all the anti-monopoly laws in the United States antitrust. Break up monopolies, wages go up. But they were scared of strikes might seem too confrontational. So they thought they could get involved in the political element. But the problem with political in the United States was which political party? And we have a winner-take-all system in the United States. That means how many political parties are we stuck with? If it's winner-take-all. So unlike other countries, like let's say Germany or Japan or whatever, you could have multiple parties that form a coalition, so you could have a working person's party. Here it didn't work. And so they appealed to sympathetic liberal Republicans and some northern Democrats. That's where you get the Democrats in the north are going to be very pro-union and pro-workers, and in the south, segregationists, Jim Crow, Democrats. And the Republicans, while sympathetic to workers' rights and pro-capitalist. Parties were really all over the place back then. Today it's a little bit more definite, but most people are independent, so I don't know. But they were immediately labeled bomb-throwing anarchists, because isn't their attitude kind of socialist, isn't it? This cooperative system has that element of that, of socialism. They want the same thing socialists want. Cross them here. And so, good luck. We'll see it. Let me know you do. The other labor union was called the American Federation of Labor, the AFFL. And Lincoln rolled the dice on having no fire drill. Anybody else? I don't know. I have no else. You missed yesterday's fire drill. Your shoes don't fit anymore, so you got a problem there. It's hot. Okay, so Samuel Gompers is one of the leaders of the American Federation of Labor. And I know what you're thinking, and I agree. Gompers is a great name. I'm going to still help. Samuel Gompers. Who agrees that that's another great name for children's? Actually, I thought about this. That's a great name for a pet. Gompers? I mean, think about it.
Like a goldfish?
Or a turtle? Mr. Gompers. I really like that.
I'll name him Gompers.
So, this is not one big union. This is an association of craft unions. And so these are skilled workers, and so they were not one big organized union. And they thought we accepted the wage system. They accepted the basic tenets of capitalism, not tenets of capitalism, but they're going to push for bread and butter issues. So just higher wages, better working conditions, that basic stuff. So unlike the Knights, they basically accepted it, but they just want, like it's this time for a strike in Akron, Ohio. We just want fair living for our families. So they don't want to get rid of it, just better conditions. So they want the same basic elements. 8-hour working days, conditions, child labor, other things they wanted. They pushed for things like, they really wanted a weekend. 8-hour work day was like the big one they really focused on. They did not push for equal rights, for women's rights or civil rights. Any of those civil rights, that was not an AFL thing. And they, unlike the Knights, wanted collective bargaining. So they wanted their individual unions to get collective bargaining agreements or strike if they don't get it. So they wanted confrontation. And that would have an appeal, except for most workers are industrial workers. So by definition, the AFL was relatively small and relatively elite. But they would be the trigger of over 24,000 strikes in the last 30 years of the 19th century. That's part of the reason why the United States is going to have more strikes and more labor action and more violent reaction, especially the police and the National Guard after 1877, than any country in the world. I love this picture because it shows garment workers in New York striking for an 8-hour working day. And I love it showing because look at the thing about the United States at that time with all these new immigrants, people coming to the United States, becoming citizens, wanting to be here. And so we have English, we have Italian, we have German, we have Russian, we have Hebrew. It's kind of amazing. My nephews, my brothers, my niece and nephew, my brothers, 2 kids. On his side of the family, they came from what is now Lithuania to New York City, Chicago during this time. So I always think about that. And they were Jewish. I should add that all the relatives that stayed in Lithuania were not. They'd all be murdered in 1943. Yeah.
Did you see they're all mixed, the violent and the passive strikes, or did also in between?
Oh, some were violent. Yeah, and most of them were violent. Usually, there'd be some violent action by the union, sabotage and things like that, but most of them were attacks by police or armed Pinkertons the companies would hire. So, one of the big fights was for an 8-hour day. And if you look at the AFL of the Knights of Labor, which one of those two unions would capitalists, those who like, capitalists with the power there, so more and more you're going to call it conservative, would they be most afraid of? The Knights or the AFL? So they don't like the Knights, but the Knights accepted it. Even with the strikes, they accepted it. I'm sorry, not they say the Knights, the AFL accepted it. The Knights wanted to change the system. So they actually feared the Knights more. The AFL is still here. It's still around. The Knights, well, in 1886, it's called the Haymarket Affair. So we had this in a quiz the other day. And this was a general strike. The AFL wanted a general strike, having thousands of workers go out and march and demand an 8-hour workday to show the power of the workers like they did back in 1877. Now, peaceful marches, that means a lot of workers risked their job and didn't get a day of pay to go out and march, and over 1 million did. And millions also came out to watch and support. And you can also see a massive police presence. Now, the Knights did not want this. The Knights were worried this would be too controversial, too confrontational, and they would be blamed. But the AFL pushed it. And at a number of spots, there was times when police tried to stop the strikers and actually fired in. In fact, in Chicago, police attacked strikers near the McCormick factory. Remember McCormick made the Reaper and killed 6 peaceful protesters and wounded over 20 more. They just opened fire. Well, couple things. First off, all over the world, people noticed this. And the next year, workers all across Europe did a march for an 8-hour workday on the same day, May 1st. And after that, May 1st is going to become International Workers' Day. All over International Labor Day. Because of what happened here on this march. All over the world, workers were inspired by what happened in the United States. So, at the turn of the century, there was a demand by workers to have a day off, called a Labor Day. A day off, and no day offs. And workers wanted it on May 1st. But that was where more conservative elements in government, that was during the McKinley administration, very conservative, they would not do it. They would not give Labor Day on the day the workers wanted. So that's why Labor Day is, it's at the end of the summer. It's the first Monday after the first Sunday in September. Why they have to wait for that first Sunday, I don't know. That's where it is. But all around the rest of the world, like Canada, their Labor Day is May 1st, and all across Europe. It's a big deal in Germany, and became a massive deal in Russia, then the Soviet Union, and then back in Russia. Well, 3 days later, in Chicago, the same place where the McCormick factory was, a plan was made for a rally. And this was a rally against police violence. And so there were a number of instances of police attacking, and so this was a rally against it. And so in your lifetime, back in 2019, 2020, there were a lot of protests against police violence. And remember I talked about people forget things? I heard a lot of people saying, oh, there's never been like this attacks on, or anti-police action, or action by the police. How can anybody protest this? This goes back to the beginning of police. There's always been this issue. Wherever you stand on it, it wasn't new in 2019. Yeah, in Chicago, at Haymarket Square in Chicago. This big park right along the river. Yes. In fact, they called it a police riot.
Yeah, I watched the documentary about the people that started it.
The Chicago 7?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the Democratic Party convention in 1968, and the protest was about the Vietnam War. Yeah, and where they had the big protests, where there were also a bunch of FBI spies in it, was at Haymarket Square, at that very same square. So, people brought their families, there was picnic, there were organizations. It was meant to be a peaceful rally. There were speeches given. They were surrounded by police. There was some name calling, but it stayed relatively safe as it went into the evening. And then somebody rolled a bomb into a small group of police that gathered together. And so the fragment, when it exploded, the shrapnel killed 8 police officers. Murdered 8 police officers. Here's a picture of the police officers right here. There was a big statue for the Haymarket 8 police officers. It became a focal point of vandalism during protests, so now it's at their police academy in Chicago. But it was clearly a terrorist attack, probably anarchist. To this day, we don't know who, but it probably was. And the rally had nothing to do with it, but 7 anarchists were blamed. But more importantly, they said that the anarchists were tied to the Knights of Labor. And so they, by implication, said the Knights of Labor were behind this. Now, the Knights didn't even want the general strike. And now they're blamed. These are the 7 anarchists. There's one that might have a tie-in, but there's never been evidence that they did it. But this would be used to discredit and destroy the Knights of Labor. And the national media, which then this newspaper was in, they publicized over and over again that the Knights of Labor were bomb throwing anarchists. So they pushed the narrative. So there were significantly more newspapers, more news back then than today. So people were like avid newspaper readers, and they got this over and over again. You know, New York City alone had 100 daily newspapers. This is the time when people read and knew the news, at least a little bit. Yes, there's sensationalism. Today, there are very few news sources anymore. And so we don't have near the news, which seems so weird because we have all this technology. You can go on your phone and pick up all kinds of news, but it's all from about 3 sources. Or people giving their commentary and their opinion. And so it's, you know, that's a problem down the road for us. But you can see this, how they draw them as a radical, where the bomb is. And then here, the meeting Haymarket Square is near the lakefront, near Lake Michigan. So they call it the anarchist meeting on the lakefront. And so immediately they're dubbed, and you don't have to write this again, I just want the excuse to write bomb throwing anarchist again. And that is the bomb found in one of the accused homes. His apartment had this bomb, which was similar to the style of bomb, with they called it a stiff fuse. So it was kind of a gunpowder fuse down to a blasting cap. 5 would be condemned to death. The man who had this bomb, which he might have tied to, but still there's no direct evidence. Someone smuggled in a blasting cap, and he committed suicide before he was executed. And a blasting cap, he chomped on it. Lived for 6 hours after he blew half of his head off. But he was going to decide his own fate. There's never been evidence.
It's like how Rod showed up for this whole
Yeah, there's. In special topics one day, as a joke, we're doing quack medicine. We found a whole bunch of things like a rod. If you have a rod, people stick a fork in your head. We're going to be experts. It was gruesome in a very funny way. Only people who lived.
Yeah.
What is it? How does it blasting cap? What is it? I'm confused. How big is a blasting cap?
Well, it was a blasting cap, and the blasting cap, basically what they would have, it's a cap like this that you would have a hammer and hit. And so it'd be used to blast cannon shell.
Oh,
yeah.
It's just full of gunpowder.
Oh, no. No. So, yeah. So this, once again, brought back the fear of radical immigrants. That's why I stopped and talked about that labor union. I pointed out the different languages. So this could fuel nativism. And talk about all these immigrants being the other, and look at all the faces of the immigrants coming in, dangerous, scary, foreign, them coming in.
They all have beards.
And that's kind of interesting about beards. Everybody wore beards then, but you notice how clean cut it is and striking. I mean, this was the golden age of facial hair. There's a lot of facial hair now, but wow, everybody had facial hair. Every president had facial hair. Until Woodrow Wilson, and then we haven't had a president with a beard since. At least not while they're president. And then we jump right to this. So, whenever anybody starts calling, let's backtrack one. I just thought that was funny, so I put that in there. And so we mentioned this once before, so we need to write this again, but it bleeds right into the Red Scare and fear of foreign immigration. And therefore, they went from bomb throwing anarchists, communists. I mentioned this yesterday, but I also thought that was a good time to show you three propaganda posters of Stalin, right? And yes, now another truly monstrous dictator, but he could represent, therefore, you want 8-hour workday? You're a Stalin. And now, be very wary of people who will call, though. I mean, really, for your own, like they call labor union members, or communists, or people who are more conservative might be called fascists. If anybody starts using that argument, they're not serious. I'm not kidding. For the most part, they probably don't even know what they're talking about. So I remember this protest from early on in COVID, and this was social distancing, it's communism. Okay, whatever. I'm not talking about your attitude towards that, all right? Same day, same woman, and you can see she's holding another sign. Can you see that? It's this sign. I think she's being defied, but she writes Deafy. lockdown, that fascist lockdowns. And so she's accusing them of being both communism and fascism. Now, what's the mortal enemy of a fascist? A communist, and vice versa. That's why I never trust people who do the ist or the isms when they probably don't know what the heck they're talking about. It's the same thing when you have an argument with somebody and they start losing. They say, well, yeah, but you're like Hitler. Then you know you've won. So, anti-union, last couple things then. There's going to be a lot of intimidation against labor unions. Heck, you get a job at Walmart, a full-time job, when the first thing they do is they make you watch a movie about how evil labor unions are. Starbucks does the same thing. Trader Joe's is rabidly anti-union. Amazon, control and pay. So one of the first things they do is a lockout. A lockout is, okay, the company will actually shut its door and not allow its workers to work. I know they won't make money in the short run, but they'll force the workers to give up their union to get their jobs back. And therefore they can cut their pay. This happens a number of times. It's happening right now at a coal mine in Alabama. So they could cut, the big thing is to cut safety, safety for workers. And lockouts are really common. Since I'm a follower of professional sports, it's really common for the owners to lock out the players, because the owners want to take all the money from what the players do on the field, whether it be baseball, hockey, football, you name it. There's been lockouts in every major sport. And just happened one in tennis. Yeah.
Boss also does that thing. They're like, we don't need unions. They actually harm the rights of workers.
Yeah, people. That's
They just
who does that.
boss.
Oh yeah, wow.
Go to watch YouTube videos. They're like, oh, these unions are harming your rights.
And you can argue whether or not you like unions or not like unions, but that is, if they don't want unions because the unions raise pay. No, you can say that's a good thing for the company or bad. That's interesting they do that. Doesn't surprise me at all.
We get paid a lot. We get paid less than some of the other stores in our area.
I believe it. I mean, like Safeway or Albertsons gets paid more than, well, almost every department store in that area, like Walmart or anything, because they're union. So, scabs. Scabs are strike breakers. Last two things. Scab, that's the name given to by unions. They call them scabs. And so if people go on strike, you bring in workers. It might not be as efficient, but you can still run the factories for a little while. So scabs. These are really common. One thing about scabs, just like the soldiers they used during the Panic of 1873, if it's white workers, what do? Like in California, they would bring in immigrants from China to replace white workers. In the Northwest or in the Northeast, they would bring in black workers to replace white workers, or bring in immigrant labor to get nativists so they don't divide, so they don't realize they're together. That's really common. And last thing for today then, last thing you have to write down, yellow dog contracts. That's their contracts they force workers to sign to not join a union. A yellow dog is another name for a coward. And they're saying that companies are cowards by forcing them to do this. That's technically illegal, but they kind of make workers do that. Starbucks is really big on that. Starbucks is rabidly anti-union. They what? And they want to have this reputation of being this like real open company and all, and they're really. Goodbye, everybody. Yeah.
No, it was something about internet. Like,
Oh, it was Montana Pilots. Have you met? Yeah.
So my dad's friend ran it, and they basically like, it was his like senior year. No, I don't know, he was older, so he was like leaving soon. But he said that his life for like, a couple of years before he left was rough because everyone hated him because he was like the guy that like sold out for the company and stuff, and a lot of people lost jobs.
Yeah, it was Montana Power.
Yeah,
And they sold out Montana Power for what's called Touch America.
yeah, they moved out of here to actually have them kind of like protect themselves because it was pretty bad.
That had to be tough because there was, you had really good paying jobs and also most of
Oh, and they still live in Boone. His parents still live in Boone. They still get kind of like the older people kind of like.
So there were people who were like, in, there were quite people who sold. Oh yeah, I know, I remember talking about it. I believe it. See you tomorrow. Tired. Hard work. And you know, I got this stuff, you'll get it done. I just gave up. That's pretty good. That's fine. Feel better. This is good. You should do okay in your test. No, it's stuff you don't feel good. Get well soon.